Welcome back to the Hard Skills Show, where we take a deep dive into the most challenging soft skills required to navigate leadership uncertainty, complexities, and change today and into the future. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Broncu, psychologist, leadership consultant, and founder of TowerScope. So, is it possible that how we've been measuring organizational outcome, success, and strategy has been missing a key element? Do we even know how to measure things that help us avoid failure? It's rarely measured, but really important. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And it's also a great fit for this season's focus on endurance in leadership, right? We, over time, last because of the fact that we're not just looking at our successes, but we're also identifying how to avoid failure. So, whether you're a leader managing a team or simply trying to support your colleagues, this conversation is for you. Let me introduce our guest today, Dr. Mark L. Vincent. He is a process consulting pioneer and a systems convener with more than 30 years of service as an executive advisor and corporate board member. He has an executive advising practice supporting global clients facing complex scenarios. Mark established and guided Design Group International, the Society for Process Consulting, which I'm a member of, and Maestro Level Leaders. His latest book, Listening, Helping, Learning, which I have been fortunate enough to learn from, reveals the core competencies of process consulting to best support clients. So I'm super excited to talk with you today to learn more from Mark. Welcome and great to have you on the show, Mark.
Well, this is a privilege. I always enjoy my conversations with you, and I feel like this will be a mutual exploration, and I can't wait.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, so the most interesting thing on my mind when we were sort of trying to figure out like what to focus on is you have these like what I consider paradoxical ideas. One is your idea that we measure outcomes in numbers, but we avoid failure by measuring quality. And the other is qualitative measures are what messes up strategic initiatives far more than quantitative. So before we like dive in, because that's a lot to be thinking about, I want us to take a little step back because a lot of people, I don't think, know much even about what process consultation is. I think when they think about consulting, they automatically go to, I hire a consultant for their expertise. And that is a different kind of consultant. An expert consultant or a content consultant is different than a process consultant. So let's start there. How would you tease that apart?
That's a strong and very good question, and I don't want to get on a soapbox too quick in this conversation. But I've come to this point where if we're going to talk about subject matter expertise and the delivery of it, which is needed, it is really more like a contractor function. It is bringing a product. In this case, the product is knowledge that exists or insight that someone possesses that they're now going to share. And when we're talking about process consulting, we're talking about knowledge we don't have yet. We're talking about adaptations that have to be made in order to figure out solutions. We're talking about what happens when an organization or a leader as an individual succeeds and they're now in differentiated space. They've begun to make a distinctive contribution. Any next step is not going to be in territory where everybody has gone before, not in this moment, not in that way, not with the same team, not with the same amount of organizational development and operational excellence and play. So they're going to have to figure stuff out. So the movement from here to there, even if we say what we want, is a process. And it's going to have complexity and it's going to have a lot of moving parts. And so a process consultant doesn't come with the answer, they come with the questions and the mental discipline to help others get in step with the figuring it out together. It is a walking alongside instead of a towering over or being consulted high up on the mountain as the guru. And I'm getting a little tongue in cheek as I say those things, but that's the big difference. It's coming with questions and a mental discipline. It's coming with asking rather than telling. It's coming with listening first as opposed to speaking first, and that is the distinction. They're both needed, but when we move into adaptive space, quite often process consulting is the tool that helps us figure out what expertise we really do need and to feel strength to go after it.
Now, a natural follow up to that question for um, leaders who haven't had the experience of working with a process consultant, especially, is doesn't a process consultant have to have experience with the challenges they're about to face in order to know and help them navigate these upcoming challenges?
Mm-hmm. You used the word paradox pretty quickly in this conversation, and it is a bit of a paradox to have no answer and to also have been there in some way before.
Mm-hmm.
So you can recognize certain aspects of the challenges, and that experience can be helpful to a degree for the process consultant. Maybe working with a similar kind of an organization or a similar kind of a moment. It can also become a block to new insight because you go just to the well where you've always been, do what you've always done, which in most cases starts to bring limited returns over time.
Mm-hmm.
So the very specific skill that the process consultant brings is that mental rigor to make sure we ask the questions in a way that organizes data so that we can get insight and choose some next steps, even if we feel we've already been here before, so that something new might emerge that again promotes differentiation, distinctiveness, a more competitive approach, an ability to solve problems. And let me put it in this maybe even more stark way. We talk about best practices all the time. Somebody put a best practice in place when it didn't exist. And so, if we're now going to say we're going to get to best practices and then stop there, we're not doing anything distinctive. We're now rising to the place of what has now become mediocrity. If we're going to be the new set of best practices to innovate and move beyond that, we're moving into unexplored space. So there's this degree of no, we haven't been here before. We may have experienced a similar process, but the answers will be distinct because there are so many variabilities.
Yeah, and I think you started also touching on this when you were talking about being in an adaptive space. So I'd love to hear more about how you think about how process consultants can help leaders be in that adaptive space when they're facing the unknown or something new.
Yeah. Well, I think the illustration started with high fits, and it's so good. There's no point in making a new one up. But the idea that a technical change, and a change that comes out of a known problem and a known solution is like changing a car tire. And there are a couple of approaches. Either I have the skills to do it, or I've got a phone number of AAA or a tow company, whatever, that will come and do it for me. If I have a flat tire 4 days in a row, I am now in adaptive space. I don't know what caused it necessarily. And it could actually be a couple of factors working together, such as my tires are worn, the road is hot, and I'm driving a little too sloppily, and now my tire blows. And then it happens again tomorrow. So I've got to sometimes eliminate approaches before I discover the right solution. So we try this, it doesn't work. We try that, it doesn't work, but it reveals other possibilities and eventually we get there. And what a process consultant is able to do is to bring those kinds of questions and structure and keep people focused. Let me try to put one other dimension here. As humans, we're not particularly wired to think or walk and process things in straight lines. We like rabbit trails. We like to go here and there. We make connections. So sometimes we get great insight by that. What process consultants are doing, if they're really good at this, is they're allowing for that because insight can come, but they're organizing the conversation in such a way that the elements of a process, steps on a map to follow, start to emerge. So someone's going to think right away about who needs to be involved. Well, we record that, we start organizing that, but other people aren't thinking about that. They're thinking about the why. What's the mission of this thing? Why it's important? And that's what they're going to want to talk about. So the process consultant is listening for those elements and helping to organize it, helping people see their thinking emerge in a structured way. When as humans, we're not particularly structured when we go into problem solving, and we're not particularly aligned. So, Mira, if you and I were working at something, you would have your lenses, your experience, your location, your geography, your gender, all of these wonderful things in play. I would have mine, and they might not necessarily align immediately. But as we talk about what we care about and what we see and what the evidence is, we get a more complete picture if we have a way to structure and organize it. And then the answers are our answers, not the outside experts who told us what to do, but our answers that have an alignment and a line of sight to move from where we are toward where we want to go. The process consultant is helping with that kind of structure.
Got it. Yeah. So if I were to sort of pull all of this together, it sort of couple of elements that come up for me. One is that it's especially critical in situations that are highly complex, moving parts, and you need to sort of like innovate. And it does remind me a little bit about Amy Edmondson's teaming book, where she describes the difference between organizing to execute versus organizing to learn, right? When you organize to execute, it might be fine for sort of highly specific routine processes that you're not trying to innovate, like an assembly line where you need to add the same exact parts every single time. You can't change too much. But if you're in an environment like healthcare, where there's lots of variables thrown at you, and it could be like in the ER room, especially, things like that, you need to innovate on the spot. You need to know what the variables you need to pay attention to. There's a lot going on. And having a process to think about that is sometimes more helpful than just like the exact manual for each thing, because you're not going to know how to face every single thing. The other thing that it's making me think about is, like you mentioned, all about how it's client informed, right? You're trying to understand and help the client understand, like, what is it about our environment that we need to attend to that is specific to us, and it's only going to work if we attend to those things that we know that the consultant might not have any idea about, right? And the consultant is trying to access that information and slow down the client from jumping too fast into a conclusion, and instead, like, take a step back and think about how might we approach this in a way that takes in all of the variables.
I love it. And it moves us into executive thinking, using the executive function of our brain, which is the problem solving function of the brain, as opposed to the lizard function of our brain. That, is this a dinosaur? Is it going to eat me? Should I run away? Should I hide? Should I play dead? And as soon as we're in that, we're not listening to people. We're not able to process information. So we need to move to that executive function. And what I would really hold out there is that the more we do it, the more disciplined we get, the faster it becomes over time, so that even in some of the more mundane technical aspects of our life, we're able to check, we're able to be a little bit more thoughtful. But you're right, we can't get into this reflective space with every small decision. But for the critical ones, we need to be. And if we don't have good habits, we will go to reactive places and we will mess things up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we are reaching an ad break. And when we come back, I want to get back to those two paradoxes again, now that we have like all the language set down for process consulting. Okay. So you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Mark L. Vincent, author of Listening, Helping, Learning. We are on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you're watching us, it's right now. And at that time, you can find us live streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, and several other locations at talkradio.nyc. And we'll be right back in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Mark L. Vincent. Okay, let's go back to that paradoxical idea. And I have it written in front of me because it is deep. We measure, so the first statement is we measure outcomes in numbers, but we avoid failure by measuring quality. Okay, at the same time, qualitative measures are what messes up strategic initiatives far more than quantitative. Help me make sense of this.
Yeah, it does tend to explode the brain, doesn't it? But let's try to break it down and make it simple. Quantitative measure, which we would call like quanta or a data point, is numbers, except data isn't just numbers. If data is information, we have numeric information. We also have qualitative information. Like if we say something is soft or something is quick, that's a quality. How do we measure that? Well, we measure them a little bit differently. With quantity, we count. Let's say there are other ways to do it, but we count. With quality, we kind of take soundings. We put something out there and see what kind of feedback we get. So if I tell you something's soft, but you tell me you don't think it is, well, then we kind of dicker at that to try and describe what that is. But I'd like to give some quick examples, if I could.
Yeah, that would be great.
Here's one just from life, and then I'll put one actually kind of in organizational leadership context, but from life. Let's say we're going to run a foot race, and you are the winner. Well, if we call you the winner, if it's quantitative, and see that even saying the words, you have to think, what word do I want to say? If it's quantitative, you have the faster time.
Yes.
If we say it's qualitative, well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about your winning attitude? Are we talking about the fact that you have now set a track record, a world record, that you have won many races over time? There has to be a little bit more definition. There has to be some conversation to know that we mean the same thing, or we're not going to have communicated very well. We'll discover down the road that, oh, that's what she meant. I didn't realize that's what she meant when she said that. And this is the sort of thing that happens all the time. Now let's put a leadership piece in here. And let's say that you are a successful leader, Mira, and I am sure you are. So if it's the way we normally do it, it's going to be quantitative. That means, oh, the income for your organization is higher year over year, or your profit is higher year over year, or that you have employees that want to work there, and employee churn is down or employee retention is up. There's some way that you measure this year over year, and these are quantitative. But if we go qualitative, now we're saying, are you safe? Are you stable?
Mm-hmm.
Are you reliable? Are you trustworthy? Do you have integrity? Do I want to work for you or with you? Do I want others to know where I work because of how you behave? Am I staying at work because of who you are? And the evidence keeps showing that people quit because of their bosses before they quit for any other reason. So these are qualitative measures that I would submit, we don't talk about and we don't start to measure. Many organizations don't even do qualitative measures in an effective way, quantitative measures, let alone getting to quality ones. But we don't measure them, and then we actually enforce and train people not to use them. So we say we'll talk about it later. That's not important. We'll figure it out when we come to it. Let's postpone that. It's too hard, we say all the time. And leaders say this to people who are learning how to behave in the workplace, and they're being trained not to give attention to the qualitative. Well, when we fight, when we quit, when we sue each other, when we have a shareholder lawsuit of some kind, or someone says we didn't earn enough, how do we define enough? Enough is qualitative. You didn't do what I asked. Whatever we ask, that's going to largely rest in qualitative measures. We don't take the time to define them. And when we do say something about them, we use very simple language that can be interpreted all sorts of ways. And we don't find out about it until we're downstream. And now to sort it through, it's painful. There are relationship wounds. People don't trust because all that's been broken to reveal the fact that we're not succeeding. So that's why the qualitative part is so critical. And yet we work against it rather than for it.
Oh my gosh. I'm like nodding like a bobblehead right now.
I talk so hard, my earpiece fell out.
Agreement. Yes. I can't tell you how many times, I've been called in to help a team that has fallen apart because of conflict. And we start talking about someone not respecting someone else. And I say, what does respect mean to you? Mm-hmm. And they haven't even talked about the fact that it means completely different things to each other. Right. I was in this one team development engagement where we ended up having to spend half a day on support because someone felt so unsafe with this team. And specifically, she said, I don't feel supported. And they were scratching their heads. I don't understand how you can not feel supported. And she had a really hard time explaining what she meant. She just said, I just don't feel supported. And it took quite a while to help her learn how to just define what are the observable or personal experiences and behaviors that make you feel supported versus not supported. And then what about everybody else? And that alone was like a massive breakdown that led to where they were and helped them start moving towards better defining, better tracking, and understanding what it would mean and what it would look like to feel supported versus not for this person versus that person. Yeah. So totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's say I'm a CEO who you're trying to persuade about this. Like, you've got to give the time. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. We've got stuff to get done. The counter argument to that no kind of pressure is that you're spending time playing cleanup. You're spending time finding new hires because people who were talented left. You're spending time and money on attorneys and lawsuits and workplace complaints and being called in front of some state agency or whatever else because somebody filed something. All of that takes time and money and is a major drain. And the more successful you are, the more potential actually there is for this. So you're spending a lot of time and money there as opposed to the time and investment to get the definitions locked in. Or even if I think there's more to the word safety than you or support than you. We've reached an agreement of what we mean for our context in this moment, in this organization, that gives us a reference point and that we can measure and track, which builds momentum, builds alignment. It becomes one of those flywheel effects that brings good and actually makes things less expensive and less of a time consumption in the end. And people are certainly sleeping better when we work to have that kind of culture in place.
Yeah, yeah. So what I'm hearing is from those original paradoxical or seemingly paradoxical phrases, we should be, number one, we should be trying to quantitatively measure the unmeasurable, the intangible, I should say. And if we can find a way to do that, we're really starting to target the avoidance of failures, not just looking at the sort of like surface level successes. Is that how you would sort of define it?
I think the only argument I'd have there, and it's not like a tense one, it's just that these are more tangible than we give them credit for. So the quantitative, we could think of it this way, quantitative measure exists above the waterline. Qualitative is kind of below the waterline. That's why we have to take soundings. We have to do some checking. We have to do some estimating. But even then, we can begin to measure. So in your support conversation illustration, you finally got to what are some of the leading indicators, not just the lagging ones, the leading things that can be done, and those become measurable and help someone begin to say support is happening. Or if someone says, I'm not being supported, you'd be able to show, well, we do these things. This is how many of them we do. What's missing here? Because we can't say this, therefore, is the only way it's done. That's why we take soundings. Here's what we've got. This is what's been established. What would make this better? And you can invite people who are being contentious into productive conversations because you have something to show them that shows the intention as opposed to we'll talk about it later. Nobody talks about that. We talked about that 5 years ago and it was so painful. We don't want to open the door to it again. That's the stuff that shuts it down. So I just think it's a little bit more work, maybe even a lot more work. And there's a certain blindness because it's below that waterline.
Yeah. So now putting it together, how does process consultation help with this?
Well, we already alluded to the fact that in process consulting, you're slowing it down. You're slowing it down in order to go fast. And you are being firm about process so that it can be softer on people, so that people aren't saying, nobody listens to me, or I'm not supported, or I don't feel safe. So you're slowing it down to where you're going to take the time to ask the questions and at least, at a minimum, lock in some definitions. So when people say, we want a productive workplace culture, okay, great, let's write that down. Who is we? What is want, demand, or wish, or whatever? Productive, what's our definition for productive? What is our workplace? Is it just this site or is it multiple sites, especially for a multi-sited organization? And what's our definition of culture and how we build it? So if we don't have agreement about those things, we're going to have some great steps. And in 2 weeks, we're going to be stuck, stymied, at odds with each other because we don't have the same working definitions. So the process consultant is holding up those questions.
Yeah, yeah. So with that, we are reaching an ad break. When we come back, I'd really like to get into, so Mark, what do we do about this? Because I'm sure by now people are like on the edge of their seats. What do we do and how do we do this? So you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Mark L. Vincent, author of Listening, Helping, Learning. I suspect we're going to probably learn a little bit about what's in his book and how to apply that to what we've been talking about. So stick around and we'll be back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marcanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Mark L. Vincent. So we've talked about how to start thinking at a deeper and higher level with process consulting, skill sets and strategic thinking and executive functioning. And we've talked about really helping leaders slow down to think more deeply about the things we make assumptions about, and to better define and better track so that we can retain our best people, and so that we can help everyone who does work for the organization feel like they can function at their very best, because that's also how you get results, and how we avoid the failures that I just described about massive conflicts that cause people to not function well together effectively as a team, and which causes so many costly disruptions, right? So Mark happens to have a framework, and I love me some frameworks. So I would love to hear about the listening, helping, learning domains in your book, and share that with our audience. And gosh, like you hear it and you're like, that sounds pretty simple and obvious. You listen, you help, you learn. It goes an awful lot deeper, but I would love for you to sort of describe these different lanes. And I think one feeds into the other too, which I think is really important as part of this. Can you share more about it?
Yes, there's two streams I think we've got to identify here. One is, if we're going to use frameworks, we need to be able to remember them, retain them, and put them to work. There are some humans that are just super, super brainiacs out there, and they can remember lists or 7 things or longer. Most
That's
of
not
us
me.
can't. As soon as we have one of these 52 principles to a better meeting, kind of a book or something, I immediately, when I ask the author, well, what's number 38? What did you write on page 114 or whatever else? They're great, but they don't become operable for us in the moment. So what I want to make sure happens is we have that kind of a framework, not that it's simplest or so simple that a lot of things are left out, but it's so distilled, so reduced to its essence that you can build out and expand on it, but you can retain it, you can remember it, and you can use it. The other is that we want to be able to build and be in the moment to do this work rather than having to leave it to try to remember something to come back. So the structure will work even if we're not very artful with it yet, even if we're not leading, but it becomes something that we can become very artful with. And so we talk about listening and helping and learning. That's the first stream. The second stream is this field of process consulting is a young field. Edgar Schein really gets credit of being the godfather of the whole thing in his work as an MIT professor, starting in manufacturing, but then starting to do the similar kind of thing with human service organizations and healthcare and even government and NGOs, working with this idea of asking questions and digging out what people knew and what they would try and drawing out what they would own as their next step, as opposed to here's what the expert says you must do. And it works over and over and over again, getting people aligned to actually carry out their steps that they're committed to doing. Well, how do you do that? Well, that became my work. So now we had an academic approach, something we could study and look at. But if someone's going to actually carry that out as a professional, what does that look like? What are the competencies? How do we know that they're actually being done? How can we go back and check our work and say, how did I do with these things?
Mm-hmm.
That became what these core competencies are. And when we distill the 12 competencies that are identified further, you end up with listening, helping, learning.
Mm-hmm.
4 competencies around listening. I'll touch on that just for a second in a moment. 4 competencies around helping. Helping in this case is not doing something to the client. Helping is co-creating with the client. Learning then is what do you do with the knowledge that you gain out of doing these adaptive moves? How does it get passed along? How does it get curated and so forth? But in doing that, they grow into each other. So when you move from listening to helping, you're not stopping listening and starting helping. Listening continues. And when the helping work is happening, you're not leaving that in order to learn, because learning will point to the next stuff to learn, which means to go right back into some form of process. So a process consultant isn't just listening to, like facing, squaring up and just listening. They're listening with the architecture of a process in mind and holding it up in such a way that what the client is saying they want to do and are willing to do, they're seeing it. They're seeing it emerge to the point they can say, yes, you just listened to me better. You just said it back to me better than I ever said it. Well, now they're listening to the opportunity or the challenge that's in front of them. So as the process consultant, if you're my client, we've gone from being across the table to actually now being side by side looking at this thing that we're now both listening to. And it's out of that kind of listening that we can co-create the set of steps that we will follow to figure some things out. And as we figure those things out, then we're going to learn. Well, and the question is, what are we going to do with this learning and who's it for? Well, that does sound simple, but the rigor to maintain that discipline and to keep coming back to where we are is the work. So, it's not that I have to be knowledgeable about engineering and manufacturing or about healthcare. I need to be good with these questions to draw out the genius of those who know something about it and to help them organize their work so they can see some kind of a threshold to walk through to where they've never been but must go or things are going to break. And that's adaptive space all over again.
It reminds me when I first started as a clinical psychologist before I moved into organizational development, I started out as a suicide researcher working with suicidal patients. And the method that I learned from Dr. Dave Jobs, who has a very well-known CAMS approach to helping people with suicidality, is you move from being across the table as the as the diagnoser and doctor to working next to alongside your patient so that you're trying to figure out together, what are we facing? What is it that has worked in the past? How can we help you pull out what you already know about yourself that could help you move forward? And it's less pejorative. It's more supportive. It's, taking time to care and listen. And it's the same kind of, idea here is like not acting like you have all the answers, but really trying to understand deeply what is it that this person is experiencing, and can I understand it from their perspective and all of the sort of nuance to it.
Yeah, and if you study these core competencies, like the society, and you said you're a member, and thank you for that. The Society for Process Consulting teaches courses on these core competencies. And when you get into the helping part, which is we're talking about organizational helping, co-creating it together, you're still going to have to think a little bit about Kharkov's model for helping, which was clinical. The therapist and the person, this speak and feedback and check and get beside each other as you're looking at what they want to do. You're just not doing it at a systems level, which means it's the organization or the system and the individuals. It's both together. And that's why in process consulting, there's this encouragement to spell the word client with a capital C as one way to be reminded that you're talking about a system as well as people. And it's the intersection of the two that you're doing this work in, as opposed to just one-to-one or one to an organizational chart.
Yeah. And I appreciate that also, because one of the greatest problems with both therapy for individuals and coaching for individuals is that often you don't learn about the massive impact on the interplay with the system. And the system will make a huge difference in whether you succeed or not. I can be the same exact person in this system and not succeed, and this person skyrocket, which personally I have experienced in my career, both experiences, right? We all can attest to that. And so I like that sort of very clear visual about big C is the interplay with the system and the individual.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes that system has already established what the end is, assuming that there's agreement. Oftentimes there's not. So you get that qualitative measure problem again. But there's often this end in mind. There's this place that someone has determined, shareholders, bosses, whatever, that it needs to go. And that's sort of an end of the day kind of thing that you've got to talk about, as opposed to just saying, where do you want to go? You can talk about how do you feel about it? What would help you want to own it more? Okay, so you don't feel like you were consulted on this. Is that part of the process that we got to go back and do some, retroactive work here to try and create alignment? And are those who are in charge willing to do that? And then this is where the process consultant actually has a lot of freedom. They can hold up their hands and say, if you don't want to work at this, nothing I can do. I'm not in control. I'm not in charge. All I can do is ask the questions and help organize your thinking for as long as you want to stay with it. Do you still want to or not? And I have found there's tremendous freedom in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So now tell us a little bit more about the movement into helping and then the movement into helping and the learning.
Yeah. So once we've agreed that we're talking about the same issue, whether it's an opportunity that we want to seize or a problem that we want to diminish, we're in agreement about that. Now we start to co-create the steps, and it starts to get a little bit granular, like when do you want to have this done by? And where is the work going to happen? And how do we want to proceed? And that is often helped by some reverse engineering. If we've got even an artificial deadline, we can work backwards to now start outlining our steps and start to be able to follow. And as we're doing each of those steps, we can come back and say, all right, we did those things. This is where we are now. Have we learned anything? Is there any adjustment we need to make? Does that adjust any of our next steps? Okay, well, then here is our next step. Let's take that now. So we're constantly bringing everybody back to the same room for the same conversation. And then when we meet 2 weeks later or whenever that is, bringing them back to the same room, the same conversation, getting them in the room for that. What's our next step? We take it. And as a solution emerges, then we are learning, we're recording that, we're producing an artifact. The process is an artifact. Our learning is an artifact. We have to keep bringing it back. And that's an excellent thing for the process consultant to keep doing that discipline of let's get the artifact out. Let's look at the artifact as opposed to what we remember about what we said. When we try to recall the previous meeting, we usually only remember what we said, not what was decided, which means we have to have the meeting all over again. So getting the artifacts out and looking at it really helps us get alignment and keep moving. And then the learning doesn't just exist for us, it exists for those who come after us. If it's proprietary, we'll have some security around that. If it's not, it becomes something that the commons can embrace, but it's not going to just rest with us. It is for the organization. It's for all of the people who are a part of it. And I could keep going, but I think we're going to be coming up on a break here.
Yeah, that's right. So, I hear a lot of connection to, I'm kind of thinking about this like a combination of process improvement plus project management, because there is a rigor to it and a tracking and a codifying. It's not just like, let's chat about the process. It's not that proofy. It's actually pretty, kind of step-by-step rigorous. So when we come back from the ad break, let's talk a little bit more about what that experience is like from the client's side and what they sort of like take away from that at the end of all of this, right? So you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mara Branco, and our guest today, Dr. Mark L. Vincent, author of Listening, Helping, Learning, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Ready to serve up success with a splash? Hi, I'm Bruce Kramer, a.k.a. the Corporate Cockroach.
I'm the Renaissance woman, Angie Snowball.
And I'm your strategy doctor, Dr. Navtej Desange, inviting you to serving up success with a splash.
Join us as we shake things up with real talk and real strategies centered around awareness, action, and accountability.
And yes, there really is a cocktail involved. Please join us and sip your way to success.
Serving up success with a splash, where wisdom meets happy hours. Cheers!
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 You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Mark L. Vincent. So, Mark, you've described this process, and it does sound like there's, some good rigor to it, and that you're going back, and forth between artifacts and experience and trying new things out and updating, and it turns into a learning experience over time where you bring in the rest of the organization. What is the experience like from the client's perspective? What are they sort of like moving from from start to finish, and what are they experiencing by the by the end?
Well, the majority of the time, it is a moment where people in the organization are reactive or afraid, uncertain, don't trust what's going to happen, ready to roll their eyes, arms are crossed, body language is very defensive. Occasionally, I have the privilege of working with an organization that's begun to get a good track record of experiences, and people are ready to get in there. But it's most people aren't like, I get to go to meetings today. I get to sit in 3 hours of working something out when we're already mad at each other. So you're starting there, and you're trying to move them to a point where they're saying, we really got stuff done. I'm so excited about our next steps. They're involuntarily telling friends and spouses in the parking lots and at the cafes about the interesting work that they're doing. You're moving them from that place to this place, or from I'll give it a try to this place of alignment. So along the way, this is where listening in a structured, beautiful way helps, so that it can become helping that's co-created. People say, my opinions are here, my voice was heard. I can see where these people I disagreed with actually have a point, and then they start to move to actually learning something and being able to celebrate their work, and then they're more ready to enter into a next process more readily. That's the journey in a real nutshell. But what I would say is I've learned that this little maxim, being very firm with process so that you can be soft on people, soft with people, is a really important point. So even though there's rigor, even though there's some mental discipline, there's a lilt to it. There's a lift to it. There's a non-anxiousness in it. There is a way to construct the container for conversation so that people will give you their best. Leaders aren't feeling threatened. They know that they can register their opinions and do it in a way that doesn't force other people to be quiet. And other people know that they're going to have to take their turn, that nobody really gets to dominate the meeting. So that firmness with process helps to set up this possibility that people can have repeated good experiences. And like a Jenga tower, it takes a while to set up. One false move, the whole thing collapses. So again, someone who's practiced at this is practicing this. People who begin to understand what part they can play and actually join in and help to create and hold that container is what builds this over time.
Yeah, yeah. What I'm actually thinking about, we haven't talked about it, it's kind of unrelated, but like you're basically turning listening into an invigorating process that feels rewarding. And that is like moving from what many of us experience, especially women in the workplace who are like often doing this listening work and holding work, is moving from emotional labor work to an invigorating experience where it's turning it into actionable, useful, productive work.
Yes, I like that. I have said repeatedly that process consulting or being a process consultant is something one is, not just what they do. You can't fake this kind of listening for very long. It comes from a place of working out whatever you got to work out so that you're not anxious, so that you're genuinely curious about a field for which you have nothing, interested in the people that are bringing something, able to tune into their uniqueness, caring about them, even though you're only going to have these little interludes with them. That takes some internal reflective work so that you can show up and hold that space, because if you've got other processes going in your brain, thinking about where you're going to go for dinner or that ugly conversation you had when you left home, those kinds of things, it's going to diminish your ability to really serve the conversation. And so when you're doing that, others can join in. And yes, instead of it being hard labor, it becomes energetic, it becomes productive. People actually start helping to reinforce the structure for listening, and making sure that they're taking turns, and they say, wait a minute, I don't think so-and-so got an opportunity to speak yet, as opposed to, I didn't get to speak yet. That to feel that shift is a sign it's starting to flow.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. If folks want to hear more about you and your work and what you're working on, we have a few links for those of you who are watching visually. But if you can also describe, where can they go to find out more about you?
Yes, well, you've got on the screen right now really what is a link tree that's just tied to my name, so markelvincent.com. And it's kind of a gateway to the work that we've accumulated over time. There's some videos, there's a chance to learn more about process consulting. If you keep scrolling down, there's the book listing, Helping and Learning. We can learn more about it and how to get it. I really have a lot of fun writing this executive thinking newsletter every 2 weeks. There's nobody sponsoring it. It's just a chance to really take the stuff that would keep me awake at night, think about what it means to lead at an executive level, and just to write about it. So it's more of an artful thing that's fun to do. And then there are other resources down here where I've got some connections to some organizations like the Society for Process Consulting that we've mentioned. I really like the Path to Enterprise Value. I have this relationship with the SAGE group that works to, it really uses a process consulting approach toward leading to a succession event or an investment event, selling a company, where it's not just how do we get the money, but the qualitative measures of succession are also in play. I found that really helpful. And then toward the bottom, you'll see a link there for systems convening, which we've not talked a lot about, but one quick definition for systems convening is multiple systems convening to do some work together. So let's say you've got a college that wants to build a new dorm next to a neighborhood association that's pretty resistant to it. And now you have a city zoning board involved. So you've got three groups that don't have to work together. Each is a system. How do you convene that in order to have a productive conversation? So it's like the superpower level of what process consulting can be.
Super interesting.
And there's been some recent work on there that Community of Practice consultants, Etienne and Beverly Wenger Trainer, have done. That's really, really good. There's some literature now developing in that regard. So this is just a gateway for anybody who wants to really geek out on this stuff, where they can go.
Very cool.
And then that last one that you've got up there is the MIGRO North America Conference. MIGRO is an emotional intelligence development technology a daily droplet, like 10 minutes of work each day that really helps to retrain the brain, literally rewires neurons in order to have a more positive approach to things, to have a speedier method for decision making, to be more empathetic, and so forth. And so we've got it's a first ever conference set for the North American hours because they're based in South Africa. And so we've got a 2-day conference, and anybody who's listening to this that would like to fill a conference room and project this on the screen and kind of be their own breakout, we'll let them fill a room for the price of one registration. It's just a $49 deal.
Amazing.
And we think it's a great way with great thing with a high return for the dollar for training. Nobody has to get on an airplane. Nobody has to pay restaurant bills. They're going to get high quality stuff. So
that is amazing. Wow. What an amazing offer, and sounds incredible. So audience, what did you take away? There's a lot that Mark shared with you today. What did you take away that is personally useful to you and your organization? And more importantly, what is one small change you can implement this week based on what you learned from Mark? Share it with us on LinkedIn so we can cheer you on. And talkradio.nyc is also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Podcasts. So it's all over the place. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with a colleague or leave a review. And as you know, if you're interested in working with Mark, you know how to find him now. If you're interested in working with me, you can go to gotowerscope.com. Thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting today. And tomorrow, we will navigate the complexities of leadership and emerge stronger on the other side. Thank you for joining me and Dr. Mark L. Vincent today on this journey. This is Dr. Mira Brancu signing off. Until next time, stay steady, stay present, and keep building those hard skills muscles. Take care, everybody.